Somebody call a doctor.
I want a bigger logo. You can't handle a bigger logo.
G'day, this is the Dr. Branding Podcast. I am your branding doctor, Frank. The surgery is open. Let's answer our next patient's question. Today comes from Grace in Australia. Grace asks, Doc, how do I bill for my branding work? I've done 50% at the start and 50% on delivery, but have been burnt by clients that have ghosted me before collecting final payment after presenting work. Is there a better way? Grace from Australia, thank you for asking that question. I know this can be a bit of a difficult one for a lot of branders, but what we're going to do, as always, is diagnose Grace's problem here. And you might have this similar problem. You might have experienced this at some point in your branding career, especially if you are a freelancer or you have your own business. Billing for your creative services obviously can be a bit tricky, but we're going to prescribe a solution here to do better branding as a branding service provider. And if you are a business, I think this would give you some insight into what you can expect from a branding person when engaging with them, the ways that people might bill you for their creative services, for their branding and marketing services. Might be a bit of an insight into what to expect so that there are no secrets. Straight up, this is business and we're trying to do better branding as a result. So, Grace's question. She's got 50% at the start and 50% on delivery. Many creatives, many branding people, many service providers in general, I think would bill in somewhat of a similar way. We take a deposit and then we collect final payment on delivery, especially for a service-based business. A little bit different for a product-based business. You generally charge up front and you don't walk out of the shop without paying for it. For a service-based business, it's a little bit different. Some of the time, obviously, we're not going to know what the end service is going to be, especially for something like branding and visuals and things like that. We don't know what we're going to get at the end of it. And so we pay on delivery, whichever way we pay on delivery. It could be before the final work is presented. It could be after it's presented, but before the deliverables are given. So it could be a brand guide, could be your logo files, font files, all that kind of stuff. So you collect payment before that stuff is delivered, or you might bill after everything is delivered. And there can be some problems with that, but we'll get into that in a sec. So there are problems for the branding people, but then there are problems for clients as well. And I'm not going to beat around the bush here with clients. We've got cash flow to worry about, and there's other part to it too of not knowing what this service provider can do, if they'll deliver what they say they will, because you've never worked with them before. There's no pre-existing relationship of trust to go off. And that can be something where you don't want to waste your money and never see it again. And a service provider that does branding just ghosts you. I feel that. Now, for many people that I have worked with, I've never had a problem with billing. I've always collected my money when appropriate. Helped out with cash flow, things like that. We obviously have times where if we need a budget for something that is quite substantial, like a brand refresh, that could be anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 to $100,000 worth of work. And obviously, if it's up, the higher it is, the less likely we're going to be able to have the money to splash it to begin with and do it up front. But there are ways of mitigating that problem, where we can do something to accommodate for cash flow and tie it to certain deliverables or certain phases in a project. But I will come back to that. But just acknowledging that there are problems for branding people and clients. Let me come back, though, to branding, because this is about Grace. Grace is a brander, a branding person. And she's doing 50% at the start and 50% on delivery. Now, if Grace is doing it before she delivers her files, great. But if it's after deliverables have been presented, so showing the client what it is she's presented, what she's done to present. So it could be the visual identity, it could be some messaging, could be some other things. And let's say the client might have, and this is the worst case scenario, obviously. Client might have screenshot things as the call has gone on, if it's a video call, which nowadays seems to be very much the case, because you can work anywhere as a branding person. For me, I work in a remote area where most of my clients are either overseas or in capital cities where I'm not. So, it makes sense to just do video calls rather than in-person meetups. But there can be these people in business that will take screenshots, and they've only paid a smaller deposit or maybe 50% of the total fee, and they go off and make it themselves, and never to be seen again. And that branding person is out of pocket because they've made something and not received due compensation, obviously, for producing it, and that client has done a runner and completely ghosted. That can happen in any industry. You could be making dresses, and someone you collect a down payment on someone making a wedding dress. Let's say it was anywhere between 25 to 50%. You go away and make this tailored custom dress for somebody, for a bride to be, and you make it completely. You get all the materials. You do the sewing. You do the embroidery, sequencing, whatever it is on it. I'm trying to think of all the different things on a wedding dress because my wife does make wedding dresses from time to time. But all the things you do, and you produce a final finished product that is made for this specific person, and they might see a photo of it or something like that, and just ghost for whatever reason. Maybe they've picked a different option and they're happy to just forego the deposit, or they didn't like what they saw and again just smoke bombed and out they go, never to be heard again. But that dressmaker is out of pocket for making the full thing and hasn't been fully compensated. All they've taken is a deposit. That can happen, and it can be on-sold. Just like a visual brand identity, you can't really on-sell that logo to somebody else because it's been tailor-made to that business or that person. So there's problems that might go on in doing this. Now, the diagnosis for something like this, in something like Grace's case, where people are being ghosted before final payment is being collected, say 50-50, and not knowing how to bill for your services, is what I'm calling brandbillixiety. It's something where we're just not sure how to bill. It's affecting our creative services if we haven't collected the payment that is due to give us not just the motivation, but just the clarity to not focus on the money and focus on the deliverable, and doing the best creative that you can. It's always something that will, enhance your ability to do so when you're not focused by other things. And, there's less animosity potentially if you're having to chase payment. Even if you do get it eventually, that can sour a relationship down the track and you don't work together again as a result of it. All these things that can happen that creates this anxiety around brand billing. So how do we solve this? How do we solve this with a prescription that can solve Grace's problem in a way that could be effective for her and for her clients in a way that makes sense for everybody involved? And this really comes down to a bit of confidence in both parties, how we solve this in terms of providing an effective prescription, because there's a few different ways of doing it. But essentially, we want to make sure that somebody is happy to offer this for a certain price, and someone else is happy to accept it for that price, and at the cadence of how much is billed at the time of commencement and completion. Okay, so this is the kind of parameters that we want to work with to create an effective prescription, especially here for Grace, and for any of you that are listening or watching as well. The first one here, 50-50. How do we do 50-50 better? Is there a better way? Grace has asked, is there a better way to do 50-50? If you are going to do it, take the 50% up front, like you have been, but collect the next 50% before you present your deliverables. If a client isn't comfortable with that, this is something that would be put into a contract and an agreement before someone would sign. So there's no surprises there of how it's going to be billed. It's saying, I've produced a result, I'm going to present this to you, but to do so, I need to collect full payment here because I have done this work. And look, if someone isn't happy with the result that you've produced, I would imagine that Grace and any branding provider will have a provision in there for revisions, for them to come back to you if you're the business owner and provide you with a revised alternative or improvement or slight tweaks to what has been presented that hasn't lived up to expectations, might not have aligned well with the brief, you can't see it working in context, all these different reasons why it might not be gelling with you. And if you offer the right feedback and you can get your revisions, that should be part of a good engagement with a branding services provider. If you're a business and if you're a branding service provider, you should be having something like that in your contracts to say, if I don't get this right, there is an opportunity to remedy that and provide you with an improved result that meets your needs. It could be one revision, it could be 3 rounds, whatever it is. That's up to you and what you offer and what can be agreeable between both parties. But if you do it where you're presenting, collecting payment first, that can take out the feeling of having to done the work and somebody seeing the work and then maybe doing a runner. They just lost the confidence in seeing you. They don't even want to worry about feedback and revisions. They're like, this person just wasn't right, and they've gone, which is odd. Whereas, most business providers would say, hey, what you've made isn't that great. We're not too sure about it. Can we revise this? Go through the motions of it. They've had the confidence in you to begin with. And, here's an option for us to revise this. But if they have no confidence in you, there might be a provision in your agreements where it has a provision for refunds. If it doesn't, that might be just on a client to have the confidence in you based on previous work you've done, testimonials. You could have referral conversations with previous clients to make sure that you as a business owner, this is talking again to business owners, you are confident in this person and you're making a good choice based on previous experience they have to produce a great result. So that would be the way to do 50-50 effective. If you do it after it's shown, then again, there's some risk in that, but that might be shared risk, taking it on. It really depends on how comfortable you are. But I wouldn't say that delivering your final brand guide and files to a client and as a business owner, I wouldn't be expecting someone to send you things before you've finished paying the full amount that is owed to the service provider, so to the business owner, to the branding person. I wouldn't be expecting that. I think that's just too risky for the branding person to be in that person's corner. For the business owner, you've seen what you were going to get. You should be duly paying for now you've seen what it is and what you're going to get. Just like buying a pair of Nikes on the shelf, you now see what you're going to get and it's time to pay for the remainder. I think that's a very fair expectation if you're going to do 50-50. So there's some risk involved in there for both parties. Obviously, it is a shared risk in some way, shape or form. But if you're the branding person, you've got to come to the table with what you believe is the right way to bill for your services. And look, if a business owner comes to you and they're not comfortable with that kind of billing, then that might just be your policy. That's the way you operate. And if they don't like it, then look, there's plenty of other options out there for them to engage with or for more clients for you to find as a result. I think that's fair enough to say you can operate your business how you want to. Okay, so that's 50-50. Another way of going about this, not so much in a better way, but maybe a different way of billing for your services, especially if it's a recurring client or to help out cash flow wise, is to spread it out into something like a retainer, or seems to be the new kind of flavor of the month or year is subscription services. It's very much the same as a retainer. It's billing based on a monthly amount. You get a certain amount of deliverable or a certain amount of hours, maybe a bucket of hours, and you as the service provider, the branding service provider to this business, give your best in that time frame as much as you can. You might do 1 day a week for a month, and that's what you you offer, or you do one project at a time. As soon as that project is finished, you can then do something else within that time frame of a month. And that could be, labeled as a subscription, labeled as a retainer. Again, there is risk involved in this where you might do more work than what you think is worth the amount that you charged for it. So depending on how you structure a retainer, if it's just you have me for a month, I'll do as much as I can, and that might exceed what you would bill, say, based on a project fee. Or for a client, for a business owner, if you're listening to this, if you're paying for a bucket of hours, it might be a use it or lose it, where you haven't got the need to use up all, say, 30 hours in a month, and they only ended up using 20 hours. Then, it's a use it or lose it system. It might not carry across into another month, depending on the agreement that you have with somebody. My problem with something like bucket of hours, you can have a dedicated day, but bucket of hours type of thing where someone's tracking their time and you're paying basically per hour in effect, and that might be something that rolls over, is it limits a branding services provider, and it penalizes them for being quick. Now you might say, well, just charge more then, but are you happy to be charged more? So this is where the rough and tumble comes in. With something like hourly, which comes into retainers and subscription models in a sense, if it's framed that way, or you could frame it in terms of certain deliverables. But without having worked with you before, it can get a bit murky, but it might be a thing where a service provider says, as a branding person says, okay, well, we're going to do this. This is going to take usually 3 months. So let's keep it to 3 months. And at the start of each month, so before we start, and then the start of the next month and the start of the third month, I'm going to bill you for each of those months. And that's going to be tied to certain deliverables that are going to be done within those months. And away we go. That's our kind of retainer, if you will. It's a little bit of a different model, I guess, but one way of doing it that can help cash flow. It's very similar to another way of going about it that I like talking about and building in this way, and I'll come back to that last. But that is one way of doing a retainer in a way that can be on paper, something that everyone knows what they're in for, timeline-wise, deliverables-wise, and payment-wise, without any variables in between. So it's quite locked in. Everyone knows what they're in for. So that's number 2. Number 3, value-based pricing. A lot of branding people might come to the table seeing value-based pricing and go, ooh. And this is a way of billing where it's based on the value of what the deliverable is going to do for the client, for the business. So if I make you a logo and we agree that it will help you make X amount of dollars, how about if I charge you 10% of that, or whatever the agreed percentage is? So if this could make you $1 million, I'm going to charge you 10%. How do you feel about that? It's like, oh yeah, that sounds great, but no, it doesn't really work that way. It's the same as going into an Apple store and them saying, well, we've got this MacBook Pro, this lovely new MacBook Pro here. And for me, as a branding person that uses it every day, like it's an absolute workhorse, using all my Adobe programs, editing, writing, calls, all these things, and it's worth a lot to me because without it, I can't do my job that could earn me, hundreds and thousands worth of dollars based on my services that require a computer to do it. And the Apple Store employee says, well, based on that, if your earning potential is 500 grand, we're going to charge you 10%. So how about 50 grand? And you're like, And then you see this guy over the other side of the Apple Store who's just using it for his everyday, emails, home life, browsing YouTube, Google, that kind of stuff, playing a bit of games on it or something. And it's not worth really anything to him. It's just his entertainment value. And the person says, okay, well, what's this worth to you? And they says, I don't know, if I did this kind of stuff elsewhere, go watch movies, had to send posts to somebody in the traditional post, it might cost me $1,000 a year. Like, okay, great. Well, how about 20% for that? And it's like, excuse me, why is that person paying $200 where I'm paying $50,000? That's value-based pricing in a context that's not the same as service-based, obviously. It is a product-based comparison, but there's that inequality there Whereas just because you are a business that has a higher earning potential and I'm going to charge you more, I don't think is a great way of pricing. If you were going to value-based price anything, it would be on the value of what it is for you to create. Based on your experience, based on your reputation, based on your availability, and how quick you might be able to turn something around as well. That might increase the value, where those multipliers on top of profit increase your fee substantially higher than another service provider that might be charging, $50 and you're charging $50,000. There's very famous logo brand designers that have come and gone, that have charged upwards of like $1 million for a logo. Steve Jobs had to pay $1 million for somebody to design his logo for the company that he left Apple for to make. And yeah, he had reputation, he had experience, he was very well known, and he charged what he charged because that's what it cost him to do what he does. Because of that expertise and experience and all the things that come with it. That, to me, is fine. That's a value-based price conversation, which is more a case of this is what I need to charge to do what it is I do. It's not a value-based thing. It's just saying this is the value that I give because I know what it can do, because I've worked with clients that have gone on to do this and this and this, and my reputation is as such. That's a little bit different. Same thing with overheads. If you work in an agency, you have bigger overheads, you have more people involved. Same thing, that needs to be factored in pricing. And this is where if you went to a service provider like myself, one person operation is going to be probably a cheaper option than to an agency of 50 people that works with brands, the likes of, I don't know, McDonald's or whatever, like really big businesses that they're working with in terms of their clientele. And that can also come with another thing of like danger money. What's the risk involved of rolling out some of this work to do? It might have bigger budgets to execute these things as well, to have a very polished on-brand look. But there is risk. Say if you did a whole rebrand of Nike, if that ever happened, there is significant risk in rebranding that type of brand. It's basically danger money, because if you stuff it up, that business can lose a huge amount of market share, or at least to them share in terms of actual shares on the stock market from investor confidence dropping because they don't like the new look. That can happen, and that can shed billions of dollars off their valuation as a result. So it's danger money to come in and do the right thing, and as well as having higher touch point changes where, for Nike, it's not just something on their website that needs to be changed for, the logo. It needs to be changed on their packaging, on their apparel, on their stores, and their all and sundry, basically. Much more touch points comes with greater risk and having to change all that stuff. So if you come in with a $10,000 bid for something like Nike, it's probably not going to hit right, because you need to be charging significantly more for obviously the output of where it's going to go, the consideration that's going to happen, the time it's going to take as well, because it's not going to be just done and run and done in a month. It's probably going to take a year or two to do and help with that rollout. Whereas everyone, when you see a rebrand, I'm going on a bit of a diatribe here, but you see a rebrand for a big business and they've had to pay, I don't know, $10 million, something like that. And everyone focuses on the logo. It's a $10 million logo. It's like, no way is that worth $10 million. It's like, well, if you look at the grand scheme of things, they've produced an identity that will work across all of their business. It's all the things that you don't see, all the hidden stuff, all the strategy, the messaging, the internal identity of team culture and all the rest of it. That is putting it up on this value pedestal that is beyond, the price that they've paid, obviously. But again, there's some danger money there. There's some reputation parts in it. There's overheads, because it's probably going to be a big agency that's doing it. And for you, as a small-time business, you're probably not going to be doing that kind of work to begin with. So it's a bit of a moot point in terms of what I'm trying to say there. So I'm going to move past value-based pricing. So we've done 50-50. We've done retainer-based subscriptions, bucket of hours, that kind of thing. We've done value-based pricing. Not the greatest way of saying that that's better by any means. Let me come to 100% upfront. Now, this can be a bit of a gulp moment for business owners and even for branding services providers. Can I charge 100% upfront? From experience, yes, you can. And yes, you can expect to be charged 100% upfront for these services based on the policy of the brand services provider that you engage with if you are the business. I don't think it's unreasonable, personally, especially if you have confidence. It doesn't need to be 100% confidence in the person that is providing your branding services. But if you're confident enough in them based on their previous work, testimonials of others, all these things that can come to the table and say, hey, yes, we can solve your problem. I have full confidence in doing so. To do so, I need payment up front to be able to do my job effectively. If you're not willing to do so, then there are other services providers out there that can help you. I am sure of it. That can just be a policy of somebody. And that is a way that I operate my business. I don't apologize for it. It's just a way that I have found to be nice and straightforward and simple. I'm not charging through the nose for my services. I'm not charging hundreds and thousands of dollars for what it is I do. And if you don't have the cash flow now, then I can't see you having it later to be willing to spend it later. But I can appreciate cash flow. I'll come back to that point though. So 100% billed up front is an expectation to say, we agree on providing these services with this output in this timeline for this price. To do so, we need a signed agreement and payment up front. We'll have provisions for revisions in this Brandbillixiety. provisions for revisions, and any changes beyond that will require a further conversation to press forward with. It might not include refunds. It might include a provision for refunds for work that hasn't been completed yet. And I think if you work with many businesses, having that clause might give extra confidence. If you're a services provider, I feel like most branding people, most creatives in general are pretty generally honest people, because they're very introverted. They have much anxiety about talking about sales and engaging in business conversations. There's less business savvy about many creatives, and it's why many creative service providers are very much undercharged for what it is they do. And I don't think that's of any conjecture there. If you're a business owner, what you do is valuable, what we do is valuable. Why can't we both be valuable in terms of what we do and what we charge? And so if you believe it's reasonable of what we want to charge, and you need to be, ready to be able to pay for this, if it's not now, then when are you going to be able to pay this? We want confidence in you that you are going to be a good business, be a good client to work with, and that you do have the assurance of the money there to be able to pay us. So it comes time that we've spent 2-3 months on your business, trying to get to understand it, provide something that's going to help you get more value out of your customers, more customers choosing you, more revenue, more profit as a result. That's what we're trying to do. And I think it's fair to be compensated in a way that is of somebody's choice, and in this case, 100% upfront. I haven't had any clients balk at that personally, charging 100% upfront, but I have had the conversations where, this is going to take me to the next point that I mentioned before. If someone has cash flow issues and they say, well, can we do this in a way that is done at a cadence? Absolutely. For some clients, I might not do it. For some clients, I do. It's up to me in terms of my choice and what I'm willing to do. But for some, I will offer it as 100% upfront for phases. So let's say I break my process down into 3 phases. The first is a workshop with my client, and then producing a strategy and presenting that needs to be paid up front. That portion, that third of the price, let's say it's 20 grand. That third, I am billing straight up, whatever it is, about 6.5 grand or whatever it is. And from there, the client's paying up front for that portion. Once that client has agreed after I've presented that first part, after we've had their workshop, I've presented a strategy, and that's agreed upon, we move on to the second phase, which would be an internal identity and messaging. There's another payment there. The next third is paid before I commence the second part, the second phase of work. Again, I come to the table, we present that, and they agree upon it. Fantastic, let's go ahead. If there isn't an agreement there and there needs revisions, there is a provision for a revision to amend things as needed, or go back to scratch, start again on that particular phase. That's a provision that's in my agreements at least. But once it's agreed, we move on to the third phase. Again, last third is paid before commencing a visual identity. So creating logo, colors, fonts, all the rest of it, and a brand guide as a result of approval for that third phase. So that's all paid up front. So everything is paid up front before final deliverables are really given at each of those phases. And that for my clients, again, has been, fine. For those who, might not agree with it, that's okay. Again, I said, I'm not going to apologize for billing this way, but this is a way that if you know what you're in for up front, you know the timeline, you know the deliverables, if you're willing to pay to get this done based on my timeline, I'm a busy person too. I have other clients that I am working with as well. I need to fit you in and have that guarantee that you are committed to this. That's another way that you could do this in a better way rather than the 50-50. If you're comfortable with it, if your client was comfortable with it, and you go from there, and you just make that part of your business. As a business person, you might have a service or a product. You bill in the way that you believe is right for your business. For a branding services provider, I think it's fair enough to say this is what we need to bill. Now, Grace, one last point, and for those of you listening who do branding services, there is a caveat that if you are working with bigger companies, let's say you're doing sort of freelance day rate, that kind of work, you might have a longer payment cycle to once you've issued your invoice to be paid, which might not lend you the ability to be able to charge up front because they might have a net 30, which means paid within 30 days of invoice, or 60 days or 90 days. Some ridiculous companies out there do a year, which I just can't understand. But that is a potential issue for charging something like upfront, and so you need to take that risk where you do the work and then you get paid as a result of delivering the work, because the timeline is probably set out further than the time it actually took to produce the deliverable, especially if you're doing something like a day rate or a week's worth of work for somebody coming in as a freelancer. But for, again, bigger companies, if you're doing like a full brand identity, I think it's reasonable to push through a payment early for you to be able to provide these services as a non-negotiable. And if you lose out because of payment, I think that's a bit of a hard pill to swallow. And I think it's a bit of a hard expectation for a smaller business having to cop that versus a big business where it's really not your money. It is your collective company's money. It's not your personal money when you're working with an individual. And again, I hope that is fair to say. I don't want to say that this is us against them kind of thing. It's not like that. I think it's just fair expectations of what someone is willing to provide for something in exchange. So look, Grace, that was a bit of a long one. I hope that, I don't know how long that actually was. Trying to look at the timer. No, I'm not too sure. But Grace, I do hope that helps you. And anyone else listening in terms of payment, you could do in terms of that prescription to overcome brand bill anxiety. You've got to be confident in what it is you charge and how you charge it. This wasn't about how to charge and how much you should be charging, but how you can, invoice for these things. 50-50, try and keep it paid before you do present. If you can, if that's reasonable. You could do a retainer or a subscription fee where it is paid before you commence those hours. You can do with someone that you have worked with. This is something I didn't mention before, but you can do retainers that might be paid at the end of a month if you have worked with this client for a period of time and there is a mutual trust between the two of you and you're happy to do that. Fantastic. Value-based pricing, again, I don't think it's applicable to a smaller business. I don't think it's a fair way of charging. 100% upfront, I do think is a fair way of charging if it's something that you believe is what is right for your business. And if someone else is willing to accept that and is confident in you to begin with. If we're not confident on both sides, then we're not going to have a conducive relationship to do work together. I think that is 100% fair to charge 100% upfront. Or you could do phase billing to help out with some cash flow depending on the deliverables if you can space them out over time to do that. And the caveat being working with bigger companies, sometimes you can run into trouble with net 30, net 60, net 90 days. So Hope that helps you. Again, if that's of interest to you, please write a comment on this episode, send me a message. But thanks again for your question. Please take a piece of brand candy, my free resource guide to do better branding that you can get on your way out at g'dayfrank.com/candy. You can also make an appointment via that link if you have a brand-related ailment that you'd like to do, like Grace. And I'll see you at the next appointment in my next episode. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening. The surgery is now closed. The Dr. Branding podcast is hosted by Reagan Frank McCrill, that's me, and for legal reasons I want to be clear that I am not a registered or qualified doctor. The premise for this podcast is that it is a satirical analogy for branding consultancy to help others with their brand success. This podcast is also sponsored by my branding business, G'day Frank. Say g'day today by booking a call with me at g'dayfrank.com.